Our climate change denying commander-in-chief decided to make a unilateral decision, even against the will of some people within his own administration, to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement and basically doom humanity.
I am fighting every day for the great people of this country. Therefore, in order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord Thank you. Thank you. But begin negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or in really entirely new transaction on terms that are fair to the United States, its businesses, its workers, its people, its taxpayers. So we're getting out, but we will start to negotiate, and we will see if we can make a deal that's fair. And if we can, that's great. And if we can't, that's fine.
Oh, okay, so apparently he's going to renegotiate it. He's not just saying that to contain the inevitable political fallout, because even some Republicans, including Mitt Romney, don't think he should pull out of the deal. He's totally going to renegotiate it, guys. You can trust him. He's never lied before, has he? Now, what he's contending here is bullshit. So he's saying that he's choosing to withdraw because he thinks the United States is unfairly targeted, seeing that the agreement imposes comparatively larger cutbacks with regard to our CO2 emissions, but the US is one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world. So if you emit the most, then you've got to cut the most. That only makes sense. And the inherent issue with the Paris Climate Agreement is not that it's unfair on the United States, it's that it doesn't go far enough and impose stricter regulations on the United States, because this deal only stipulates that the United States cut 26 to 28% of 2005 levels by 2025, but nonetheless, the United States is now joining the likes of Nicaragua and Syria, the only two other countries that have yet to sign onto this agreement because of Trump. Now, the legal issue is relatively complex because I don't know that he actually has the authority to unilaterally withdraw, because the agreement is binding for 4 years, but if we don't meet our CO2 targets, then he's effectively pulling us out regardless, so it doesn't really matter. Now, there will be a plethora of very negative consequences that will in fact come to fruition because of Donald Trump doing this, and he's maintaining that, you know, he's pulling out because of the America First policy and philosophy that he has. And, you know, this deal is too unfair to America, but in actuality, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement will hurt Americans economically. So Wired explains, as for renewables, pulling out of Paris could cut the US out of an explosively growing market. China, India, and other growing economies have pledged billions towards renewables. The competition may have already begun. In April, Atlanta-based solar panel company Suniva filed for bankruptcy, citing an unfair advantage by Asian competitors. Adding to the drama, a Chinese wind company recently offered to teach U.S. coal workers how to be turbine technicians. Now, besides the economic consequences, there are obvious environmental consequences that will harm the planet. This will cause rising sea levels, ocean acidification, drought, extreme weather patterns, destruction of our coral reefs, melting glaciers that will threaten our fresh water supply. I mean, all of this will disrupt human lives and catalyze mass migration. Also, climate change is going to lead to mass extinction of countless species, including tigers, snow leopards, Asian rhinos, orangutans, African elephants, polar bears, among other creatures. And as the ice caps melt, it will leave us vulnerable to ancient diseases that we don't know how to combat. But that's not all. So according to the Washington Post, the link between climate and disease is most often identified through the spread of disease vectors such as mosquitoes. As areas warm, habitats for insects, mosquitoes, mosquitoes and deer ticks, for example, expand, exposing new populations to new disease threats. As Maureen McKenna recently explained in the New York Times Magazine, the approximately 1 degree Celsius increase in average temperatures the planet has experienced is changing the numbers and distribution of the insect intermediaries that carry diseases to people. Most immediately, we could see a larger number of people at risk in the United States from Zika this summer as the Aedes aegypti mosquito moves farther north, complicating the already challenging efforts to constrain the disease. But a second and less appreciated interaction between climate change and epidemics occurs when humans and animals are forced to compete for dwindling habitat and resources. The scenario behind Ebola's rise and global threat in 2014 illustrates this point. Climate change destroys habitats and stresses animal populations, such as the bats of West Africa, forcing them to hunt for food nearer to humans. Humans, likewise pressed by climate impacts, encroach more closely on animal habitats. While we cannot know that climate change was the cause of the specific interaction between bats and humans that is believed to have launched the Ebola outbreak in Guinea, we will see more of these interactions in the future and more epidemics as a result. Ebola demonstrates that even localized dislocation of people and animals can create global risk. Climate change is a threat multiplier for much broader dislocation, accelerating the complex factors that drive people from their homes. So even though there's going to be more diseases, Donald Trump actually called for a near 20% cut to the National Institutes of Health. So organizations that could help us combat the spread of these diseases the most, Donald Trump wants to cut their funding by nearly 20%. I mean, that's crippling. So he wants to leave us completely doomed. He wants to do nothing about climate change, which will accelerate all of these consequences I talked about, including more consequences that we can't even anticipate. This will increase the spread of diseases, and the agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, National Institutes of Health, that can help us combat climate change and mitigate climate change and adapt to climate change and combat the spread of harmful and killer diseases. He wants to cripple those agencies and organizations as well. So Donald Trump is dooming the species. He is dooming humanity, and it's not just Donald Trump. There are other Republicans, even though credit where credit is due. Many Republicans came out against Donald Trump unilaterally withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. Donald Trump, like many Republicans, supports this action because he doesn't believe in climate change. He thinks it's a hoax manufactured by the Chinese. He said this. So Donald Trump is facilitating death and destruction right in line with Republicans. It's what they've always wanted. They've always pushed for wars. They've always been against climate change and protecting the environment. And Donald Trump is doing exactly what Republicans want him to do. And what's interesting to me is that there's this dynamic within the Trump administration that I didn't expect. So you have people like Rex Tillerson, Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, all urging him to not withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. And then you have people like Scott Pruitt, the EPA director, who, as the attorney general of his state, sued the EPA multiple times. You have him, as well as Steve Bannon, a white nationalist, encouraging Donald Trump to withdraw. So, I mean, he is listening to the most loony people within his administration. And I'm not going to give Rex Tillerson and Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner any credit because they're complete warmongers. But on this issue, they're right. But reason didn't win out in the end. And what we're seeing now is the United States failing their people, the United States failing humanity, and Donald Trump wasn't the first person to fail us on climate change, and he won't be the last. So I want to stress that climate change is in our hands. We have to be proactive. We have to do everything in our power to reduce our own carbon footprint because our elected officials don't care enough about this issue to make any meaningful changes. And when you look at the Paris Climate Agreement, as I've stated, it doesn't go far enough. So it's in our hands now. If we want the species to survive, we have to make drastic reductions to our own carbon footprint. So this story is incredibly disturbing.
Support this podcast by joining the independent progressive media revolution today at humanistreport.com.